I was 30 when I first believed I had everything I could ever want: a comfortable home, a loving wife, and a sweet young daughter. Sophia, with her warm presence, had stepped into our lives just when I thought joy might never return. My daughter, Isabella, was still so young, and I had devoted myself entirely to shielding her from the unbearable loss we had suffered. The weight of grief had been my silent companion ever since my first wife, Rebecca, passed away. Isabella had been just a year old, too young to understand the absence that would shape the years to come. But I understood. Every day, I carried the ache of losing the woman I once loved, the pain settling into my bones like an unwelcome guest. I told myself that if I could bear it alone, I could keep Isabella safe, secure, untouched by the sorrow that had marked my own heart. Then Sophia came into our world, bringing with her a quiet kindness, a patient warmth, and a deep desire to be a mother to Isabella. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe after so much darkness, light could finally stream through the cracks of our broken home. I remember those early days, the soft, reassuring tone of Sophia's voice as she comforted Isabella, the gentle touch of her hands, the hesitant yet promising smiles we exchanged as we worked to piece together the fragments of a life that had once been whole. I thought that love would be enough. I thought that by giving Isabella a mother's embrace and a steady home, I was crafting the family she deserved. But as time passed, shadows began to creep into the spaces where warmth had once been. There were little things at first, barely noticeable, easy to dismiss. A distant look in Sophia's eyes when she spoke to Isabella, a pause before her laughter, as if she was holding back something unseen. I tried to ignore the unease that stirred within me, convincing myself that love could mend even the deepest wounds. But late at night, in the solitude of my own thoughts, doubt whispered to me. Was I clinging to the dream of a perfect family, blind to the truth that some wounds never truly heal? More and more, I found myself watching Isabella retreat into silence. Once she had been my shadow, her tiny hand always reaching for mine, her laughter filling the quiet spaces in our home. But now, when I reached for her, she hesitated. Her gaze turned guarded, her smiles polite but distant. It was as though an invisible wall had been built between us, one I didn't know how to tear down. And yet, despite the growing ache in my heart, I clung to hope. I convinced myself that if I tried harder, if I loved more fiercely, I could mend the cracks forming beneath us. But with each passing day, it became harder to ignore the truth. I was losing my daughter. The family I had struggled so desperately to build was slipping away, like sand through my fingers. I fought against it. I tried to bridge the gap, to reignite the warmth that once filled our home. But my words fell on deaf ears. My gestures of love were met with indifference. In the quiet hours of the night, I lay awake, haunted by memories of Rebecca, the love we had, the certainty I once felt in my place as a father. With her, I had never questioned my bond with Isabella. But now, in this fragile new reality, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The pain of being on the outside, of watching love drift beyond my reach, became an unbearable weight. Family, I had always believed, required sacrifice. It required forgiveness. But what if, after all I had given, after all I had endured, I was still left standing in the cold? What if the love I had fought so hard to preserve was nothing more than a mirage, a fleeting illusion in a desert of loss and regret? And then came the moment that shattered whatever remained of my illusions. I woke up to the soft light of dawn filtering through the curtains, my mind still heavy with the remnants of restless sleep. But the moment my eyes landed on my phone, a streak of unease coiled in my chest. A flood of missed calls and unread messages greeted me, each one carrying an urgency that sliced through the morning's stillness. I opened the first text. "Dad, where's the food?" The message was simple, yet it struck deeper than any sharp-edged words could. It wasn't just about a forgotten meal. It was a reflection of the growing distance between us, the widening chasm I had felt for so long. A sad, weary smile ghosted across my lips as I thought about the grand celebration I had prepared for Isabella. A feast meant to mark a milestone in her life, a gesture of love I had poured my heart into. But instead of gratitude, I was met with absence. I was met with the painful truth that my love, my presence, my efforts were no longer needed. With measured calm, I typed my response. "Yeah, don't worry. It's being enjoyed by people who genuinely appreciate it. Happy graduation." I knew the weight those words carried. Knew they weren't just casual remarks, but the quiet resignation of a father who had finally stopped reaching for something beyond his grasp. Not long after, my phone rang again. This time it was Sophia. Her voice was sharp, brimming with disbelief and frustration. Are you kidding me, Daniel? You wrecked her day. How could you be so selfish? I let her words hang in the air, let them sink in. But I had already made peace with the reality before me. Thought you mentioned I wasn't family. Figured I shouldn't impose on her celebration. A heavy silence stretched between us before the line went dead. And just like that, the final thread snapped. As the hours passed, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Calls from family members, texts filled with disappointment and reproach. People who had once stood by me, who had once understood my pain, now reached out only to question my actions. I sat at the kitchen table, my untouched coffee growing cold, my thoughts tangled in the echoes of all I had lost. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't fight it. I didn't chase after love that had long since slipped away. I simply let go. Uncle Mark's message was short, yet it cut deep. This is low, dude. Solve this before it's too late. A simple sentence, but it carried the weight of disappointment, of judgment wrapped in concern. Then came Cousin Elaine, always the voice of reason, urging me to be the bigger person. But even in her words, I could sense the irony. I had already spent years being more than enough, giving more than was asked, trying to hold together something that had long since started to fracture. Their messages blended together, forming a chorus of concern that stung as much as it affirmed my decision. Once, family gatherings had been a source of joy, warm evenings filled with laughter, Isabella's giggles echoing through the house, the comforting hum of conversation after supper. Now, each call, each text, was a stark reminder that those days had faded, replaced by cold, distant disapproval. I wandered through the silent corridors of my home, retracing steps that once led to happiness. The remnants of a life I had worked so hard to build surrounded me. The framed photos, the little notes Isabella used to leave on my desk, the echoes of a love I thought would last. But those moments now felt like relics of another existence, a life that belonged to someone else. The ache in my chest wasn't just for a ruined celebration or an abandoned party. It was for the slow, deliberate unraveling of a bond one had once believed was unbreakable. I had done everything in my power to create a family that could withstand the weight of grief, to heal the wounds that time alone couldn't mend. Yet here I was, watching it crumble piece by piece, not with a sudden catastrophe, but with the quiet, agonizing erosion of love turned into obligation, affection reduced to expectation. And in the stillness of my thoughts, a question surfaced, one I could no longer ignore. Had my love simply not been enough? Or had I been blind, too caught up in the hope that things could be mended, unable to see that the very person I trusted with our family had been slowly peeling away my place within it? Each missed call, every unanswered text, reinforced the truth I had been too stubborn to face. I wasn't just being left out of a celebration. I was being erased, step by step, from the very core of the family I had held so dearly. And as the day stretched on, a strange mixture of emotions stirred inside me. A storm of anger, sadness, regret, and unexpectedly, a hint of liberation. I stood at a crossroads. I could continue as the silent, wounded father, hoping that time might somehow stitch together what had already been torn apart. Or I could acknowledge that this was the moment when the last fragile links holding us together had finally begun to break. As the long, excruciating hours passed, the fallout from my decision became a mirror, reflecting both my strength and my vulnerability. Every ignored call, every lingering text, was an echo of the inevitable truth. I had taken a stand. I had chosen to protect what little dignity I had left, even if it meant watching a celebration dissolve into dust. The pain of being cast aside by those I loved was sharp, but there was a strange solace in knowing that sometimes the only way to hold on to yourself is to let go of those who no longer hold you close. The phone buzzed again. I sat in the dim light of my study, staring at the screen, watching as missed calls piled up like unsent letters. The silence that followed each ignored ring reverberated inside me, a hollow space growing wider with every unanswered message. It wasn't just Sophia's desperate attempts or Isabella's quiet withdrawal. It was also the distant voices of relatives and old friends who once celebrated our family's joy. Now, those same voices felt like accusations, reminders of a life that was slipping further and further out of reach. Uncle Mark's blunt reprimand, Elaine's gentle urging, the quiet disappointment from those who had once laughed at our dinner table. I found myself scrolling through the endless list of calls, counting them as if each notification marked the distance between what once was and what could never be again. 3 days passed. The silence remained thick and unbroken, until my phone rang once more. Sophia. I let it ring, hesitating. But something inside me told me this wasn't just another plea for reconciliation. There was something different in the air, a shift I could feel even before I answered. I pressed the phone to my ear. Daniel, I know you're furious, she began. Her voice, usually so composed, wavered between frustration and something that almost sounded like desperation. But we need to talk. About Isabella's college tuition. A slow, bitter chill crept through me. The tuition. It had always been an unspoken agreement. A responsibility I had taken on without hesitation, without question. Even when I felt like an outsider in my own home, even when the distance between us grew wider, I had never once considered withholding what she needed. But now it was no longer a matter of care or duty. It had become a bargaining chip, a tool used to pull me back into a role that no longer felt like mine to fill. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every sacrifice, every compromise, every moment I had swallowed my own pain for the sake of a family that no longer saw me as one of their own. My voice, when I finally spoke, was steady but heavy with finality. There's nothing left to talk about, Sophia, I said, each word deliberate. Isabella made it clear, I'm not family anymore. So I suppose she doesn't want my money either. A thick silence filled the line. For a brief moment, I thought she might understand. That she might hear, truly hear, the years of hurt in my voice. Then, like a dam breaking, her anger surged through the receiver. You're wrecking Isabella's future, she cried, her voice cracking under the weight of frustration, of fury, of something I no longer had the energy to untangle. The sting of her words was sharp, but not surprising. This wasn't about love or trust or family. This was about what I could give, what I could provide. And in that moment, the last shred of doubt disappeared. I let her voice wash over me, absorbing every accusation, every plea. Then, without another word, I ended the call. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hands, the silence in the house pressing in around me. That moment was the final crack in a foundation that had been crumbling for years. For so long, I had been nothing more than a provider. A source of stability, of money, of obligation. My worth had been measured not in love or presence, but in what I could give. And now, at last, I saw it clearly. I was no longer wanted. Not in their plans, not in their lives, not in the carefully curated version of family they had built without me. With that realization, I picked up my phone one last time. There would be no more discussions about tuition. No more financial rescues. No more trying to mend what had already shattered beyond repair. The line had been drawn. And this time, I wouldn't cross it again.